There are reports, if you do your research, there have been instances where Ugandan military were engaged in raping both men and women in northern Uganda, burying people alive and then setting fire on top of the graves, burying people in their huts. I suggest that you go into the human rights report that have been conducted by the human rights organizations, including Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International. These reports have not garnered the same coverage that have the atrocities of the LRA, and that is the only difference in this narrative. And I hope you would support me by helping to get this word out.
All right, let's continue to see what we have on the surface here. The LRA, they have agreed to sign a peace agreement with the Ugandan government, and the rebel leader Joseph Kony is expected to sign his part of the agreement from a region in the Democratic Republic of Congo and Sudan's borders. The question that arises here, either way, whichever you gentlemen choose to decide or think about this matter, is what will this deal at the end of the day mean for the government of Mr. Museveni? Mr. Johnson.
Well, Mr. Museveni would be in a slightly stronger position. It means that the rebels themselves would disarm, but and that will take time because there's a lot of ammunition out there. The problem is whether the rebels would be prepared to accept the fact that some of them would have to be tried in local courts in Uganda or elsewhere for the terrible crimes that they've caused on their own people over the time of the war. But let's not forget, Mr. Johnson. Let's not forget that they've already refused to disarm. Do you think there's going to be any effectiveness on the part of this accord when this rebel group is not disarming? The process of peace and the signing of an agreement has got to go hand in hand with disarmament, and there's got to be rehabilitation into the community, not to mention some form of reconciliation for the pain and suffering that they've put on people, and for people to come to terms with that. So it's a complete package. You can't have half and a half. You can't have bits and pieces of it. It's the full thing or nothing at all. It's either we're going through this process for the purpose of dotting the I's and crossing the T's. If we're going through the process specifically for peace, then I'm afraid the holistic measures I've just explained should be followed strictly to the letter.
All right, let's see what the Ugandan population is thinking. In New York, Mr. Ali Mahdi, despite progress at talks after months of deadlock, this is according to one media outlet, many Ugandans remain skeptical that Mr. Kony will emerge out of the bushes, so to say, to sign this deal for fear on arrest on the part of the ICC in war crimes. So do you think that this is the beginning of the end, and are we going to find any solutions basically because of this fear?
That is only part of the problem. The other part is that Ugandans and the international community are aware that both the principals that are supposed to sign this agreement are characters that are untrustworthy. In other words, both Joseph Kony and Museveni are people that are not trustworthy. So people are guardedly optimistic, even those that want to be optimistic, because they've engaged in the peace process on several occasions in the past, only to renege on promises. So Ugandans have been disappointed very many times. So you cannot blame them if they are very skeptical at the same time. But this opportunity presents itself in a rather different way. This is the first time ever that the peace process has garnered significant international coverage. So that might make a difference. But there is still another major bone of contention here. The Ugandans are proposing that rather than take the indicted leaders of the LRA to the International Criminal Court, that a domestic a judicial process take over. The only question that has not been explained to Ugandans and others outside Uganda interested in the peace process is the judicial system going to only take into account the crimes committed by the LRA, or is it also going to address the crimes against humanity committed by Uganda's armed forces and its military command, which is, many people think that would be unlikely because it would almost be like tantamount to President Museveni putting himself to trial.
So basically, the government of Uganda doesn't mind that it lacks the required laws to set up a special court for the prosecution of the LRA leader and his accomplices, so to say, Mr. Alamadi. Is that the case?
No, put it this way. If you were part of the Ugandan leadership, would you put up a system that could end up also trying the membership of the Ugandan government? That would seem to be asking a bit for too much.
All right, Mr. Johnson, is that the case?
Well, yes, there's all of that. I mean, to be honest with you, it all depends on what side of the fence you sit on this one. I think the international community will look at both sides. At the moment, they're focusing on the rebels themselves simply because we have a government in sitting and a government that's respected and appreciated for that. But in saying that, they themselves may have committed some level of crimes. If that is the case, then they should be brought to account, and there's a process for doing so. The International Criminal Court has the mandate to go in and grab these people wherever they are and actually bring them to account. But the thing is, how will the community in Uganda respond to this? A lot of these people, if they're brought back into the community, I mean, some of them are children, some of them were adopted. I mean, some of them are actually within the army, without their rights. Their rights have been taken away from them. They're there under duress. Mm-hmm. So how do you attain? How do you deal with those sorts of situations? So I think it's over time we may be able to see some solutions, but I think it's going to be slightly difficult for the International Criminal Courts to get this one right.
All right, Mr. Alamadi, reports indicate that Mr. Kony has migrated to the Central African Republic and linked up with Chadian rebel groups. So do you think that we're at a stage where the quote-unquote insecurity caused by the rebels, at least on one part, has now become a regional matter and neighboring countries should really be concerned regarding the LRA?
They should be concerned not only regarding the LRA. As I pointed earlier on, the International Court of Justice found Uganda liable for atrocities, crimes against humanity, committed by Uganda's national army in a foreign country, in the Congo, when it occupied the eastern Congo, illegally extracted resources from there, killed civilians that opposed it. So the violence in the Great Lakes region has been regional for a very long time, hardly just because of the LRA. The LRA, what is the LRA after all? At its peak, I doubt that it had more than 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 fighting men, whereas the Ugandan army had at least 40, 50, 60,000 fighting men, and they were responsible for much of the atrocities committed in eastern Congo. 5 to 6 million people were killed in eastern Congo. And once again, we have to get to the duplicity here of international media. We keep focusing on Darfur, Darfur, Darfur. Yes, of course, atrocities are occurring in Darfur. But when you keep focusing on certain particular atrocities and ignore vast crimes elsewhere in Africa, people start questioning the motives of this selective coverage. We have no right to ignore the atrocities as in eastern Congo, just as we have no right to ignore the crimes that have been committed against the Acholi people in northern Uganda.
All right,
perhaps 1 million people have died.
We're almost running out of time.
And most of them died, by the way, in the camps.
Go ahead,
Susan.
Mr. Johnson, very quickly, please.
Yeah, Susan, in a nutshell, I think the reason why the rebels don't want to come to the table to sign, or they're being reluctant or staying in the jungle, is they've seen that other rebel leaders around the world have been captured. The most famous of them have been the Charles Taylor of Liberia, and they've seen exactly the fact that he can be taken to The Hague and held account, and this is what they all fear.
Mm-hmm, right. All right.
And by the way, Charles Taylor was taken after he was president, which means Museveni could also be taken as president to the ICC.
Point taken.
All right. So solutions, very quickly, Mr. Alamadi, before we say goodbye to you. What is your solution?
I think that this presents the best opportunity for Uganda to start the recovery. Let's make sure that there is adequate international media covering the peace process. Kony does not matter. Kony could die tomorrow, and the problems will still maintain if there is not adequate international involvement in this process. Kony could sign the agreement and still stay in hiding in the jungle there. The problems of the 2 million Ugandans in those death camps would still need to be addressed. Kony is just a diversion.
All right, Mr. Milton Alimadi from the Black Star News in New York, thank you for your elaboration. Ayo Johnson, African Specialist in London, thank you as well.